Evening and welcome to Story Hour. I'm Laura Blackwell, tonight's host. My co-host and one of tonight's readers, Daniel Marcus, started Story Hour at the beginning of a local shelter-in-place order to help people stay connected. And here we are, and we've gotten through the literal darkest time of the year. We've passed the solstice, and I think for some of us, the metaphorical darkest time of the year, knock wood, as well. So thank you all for being here for Story Hour. Welcome back to those of you who are returning, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. As always, we have two writers reading for favorite nonprofits. Tonight's readers are Dawn Vogel and Daniel Marcus. If you are fortunate enough to help others during this time, please consider a donation to one or both of our two featured nonprofits, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project and Union of Concerned Scientists. Dawn Vogel is reading for the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Northwest Immigrant Rights Project promotes justice by defending and advancing the rights of immigrants through direct legal services, systemic advocacy, and community education. NWIRP's legal services are critical to helping thousands of immigrants in Washington state navigate the complexities of the United States immigration system so they can apply for asylum or other forms of immigration protection. Without appropriate legal assistance, the men, women, and children served by NWIRP may be less likely to obtain legal immigration status and more likely to be returned to a country where they face ill treatment, torture, or even death. You can learn more at nwirp.org. Daniel Marcus is reading for the Union of Concerned Scientists. UCS tackles some of the hardest problems facing humanity with the commitment and urgency they require. They work to improve the human condition, help communities build resilience, and support and restore thriving natural ecosystems. They fight back when safeguards are sacrificed for private profit, and they persevere until goals are achieved. You can learn more at ucsusa.org. If you're here on Zoom, feel free to leave your camera on. It can be nice for our readers to see their audience. Chime in on the text chat on Zoom if you like. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, thank you, but I apologize, we're just not seeing your messages in real time. So tonight we have a special story hour because it's the last story hour of 2020. And we're going to have one holiday story from Dawn Vogel and one distinctly not holiday story from Daniel Marcus. So we're starting with nice and ending with naughty. So if you have anyone with you who should not hear naughty, even if it's yourself, we don't judge, just duck out before Daniel starts talking. Okay, so we're starting tonight with Dawn. Dawn Vogel's academic background is in history, so it's not surprising that much of her fiction is set in earlier times. By day, she edits reports for historians and archaeologists. I still think that sounds like the coolest job. In her alleged spare time, she runs a craft business, co-runs a small press, and tries to find time for writing. Her steampunk series, Brass and Glass, is published by DEFCON 1 Publishing. She is a member of Broad Universe, Codex Writers, and SFWA. She lives in Seattle with her awesome husband and fellow author, Jeremy Zimmerman. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm really tongue-tied tonight. Jeremy Zimmerman, not Zingerman's. That's where I order Christmas presents.
They tongue-tied tonight 3 times fast.
La, 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 la. And they're a herd of cats. Dawn, welcome. Thank you so much for coming back tonight.
Thank you. Hopefully the herd of cats is going to decide to calm down. They've been running races, but if you see a flash of black or tabby, that's one of my kittens.
You know, we've had some really fabulous readings and we've never had a single one that wasn't improved by an appearance from a cat. So don't worry about that.
It'll mostly be whether they scratch me on their way past or not.
Okay, that they're not allowed to do. You tell them said so.
Yeah, they heard you. Excellent. All right. So yes, I'm actually going to be reading one Christmas themed story and one non-Christmas themed story that's very much shorter. Both of these are kid friendly, so if you happen to have your kids nearby, don't worry about them listening in. They will not hear anything that they shouldn't while I'm reading. The first story is called The Gift, and it appeared in the Bronzeville Bee, which no longer exists, a year ago. and now seems like a good time to bring it back. And it begins, as many stories this time of year do. 'Twas the night before Christmas. And I wasn't done with my shopping. There was only one person I wanted to buy a gift. I knew she'd understand if I didn't give her anything, but I wanted to. I needed to see her eyes sparkle with delight. I'd worked until closed, which meant there were no shops open by the time I was done. Well, no shops above ground. I'd heard rumors about the Goblin Market, mostly whispers filled with regrets, but other murmurs suggested there might be something worth finding, something that wouldn't come at too dear of a price. Working in retail, I talked to a lot of people. Enough of them had given me directions to the Goblin Market. Some of them were contradictory. I'd teased out the pieces that weren't, and I was pretty sure I had the route figured out. Half a block down Main, take the alley through to First, and then use the half alley to get to the courtyard in the back of the Highland apartment buildings. Turn around 3 times Widdershins, which I had to look up, counterclockwise it turns out, back the way you came, and the entryway would reveal itself. I was a little leery of that last detail. Reveal itself how? I guess I'd just have to try it. I didn't see a soul on the streets as I made my way to Main. The alleys were empty too, bearing the lingering scent of garbage. A sleek black cat sat on the fountain in the Highland Apartments courtyard, cleaning itself. It looked at me, blinked its big green eyes, and resumed ignoring me, even as I turned 3 times. The half alley felt different when I stepped back into it. Cleaner, less smelly, and brighter, even though there were no more lights than there had been before. When I reached the other alley, people strolled down it, people who weren't dressed for the winter weather. A bead of sweat rolled down my cheek, my hat, scarf, gloves, and heavy coat now too much for the temperature. As I shucked them all, more people passed me, shouting out greetings to one another. A wave of panic passed over me. Would I be allowed to shop in a place I had never been before? Was this a secret club I was violating? More importantly, now that I was on my way, could I even change my mind? I had no choice but to follow the crowd. At least I didn't have to worry about the entrance being revealed. They'd lead me to it. There wasn't a door in the side of the old brick building before, but that's where we were headed. A riot of smells, sounds, and colored lights poured from the doorway, coming from somewhere down the stairs. Folks filled in behind me, giving me no choice but to continue into the belly of the beast, as it were. I reached the bottom of the stairs and realized I'd dropped one of my gloves. I turned to see if I could spot it, but the steady stream of people descending prevented me from going back. Clearly, this was the entrance. I hoped I'd find an exit. Then I turned to take in the sights, and I knew I was in the right place. The booths were bedecked with curtains, streamers, and more twinkle lights than I'd ever seen, giving the whole place an ethereal feeling. The aromas were earthy, but spiced with otherworldly scents. There were snippets of conversation I couldn't follow, and others I could, and music from throats and instruments unlike anything of the waking world. I wanted to take pictures or video, but I felt like that would be a violation of the inherent secrecy here. I let the wave of shoppers carry me along past the vendors, catching the barest glimpses of their wares. Every table was a mix of simple, practical items and tantalizing slivers of something special, magical. I was glad I wasn't ready to shop yet, because I couldn't have stopped to look at anything I was interested in as the crowd swept me along. And then, before I knew it, I was back out on the street, the cold air nipping at my bare fingers and face. The swirls of lights and colors and scents already felt like nothing more than a dream. I had to get back. I ran, ignoring the cold, to the place where I started. The door that had appeared was gone now, so I followed the directions again. Half a block down Main, alley through to First, half alley to the courtyard behind the Highland Apartments building. I breathed a sigh of relief when I rejoined the stream of shoppers headed to the Goblin Market. This time, I reminded myself I'd step out of the flow of traffic and shop. My other glove was gone by the time I reached the bottom of the stairs. I had no idea if I'd lost it during my first pass through the market, on my mad sprint back, or on my second trip down the stairs. Wherever it wasn't important. I could replace a pair of gloves. I was back inside, and I wasn't going to wander out again without getting what I came for. The throng of humanity moving through the main thoroughfare was less pressing now, but as long as I was within that mass of people, I wouldn't have the opportunity to shop. Instead of looking at the wares, I scanned the pathway ahead, identifying a dark hallway to the left, near the midpoint of the market. That was where I could step out of the flow and work my way along the booths, swimming upstream, as it were, to find a gift. The hallway was narrower than I anticipated, barely wide enough to squeeze through sideways, like some of the shelving in the stockroom at work. At the opposite end was more light, more smells, and fewer shoppers. I hadn't seen this part of the Goblin Market on my first pass. Maybe there would be something better in this other section. I grinned and picked up my side-shuffling pace. My scarf slid out of my hands like someone had yanked on one end, and I looked back the direction I'd come. The opposite end of my scarf was caught on a nail or splinter at the end of this passageway, and before I could chase after the end nearest to me, a hand snatched the snagged end and pulled the entire scarf out of my sight. I sighed. It wasn't dear to me, just an old scarf I'd worn for years. It, like my gloves, could be replaced. I reached the end of the hallway, which opened into another section of the Goblin Market. In this space, though, I could see the wares and their vendors. I could walk up to any table I liked and peruse the offerings. Finally, I could find a gift. The first table I passed was covered in shoes, all of them without a match, most of which had seen better days. Interested in a trade? The vendor asked, eyeing my boots. No thanks, I replied. I need these. The next table was covered with paper flowers. Cute, but not quite what I wanted. The woman selling them worked on another while she followed me with her gaze, never once looking down to make sure she'd folded the paper correctly. I passed by 3 or 4 more tables, none of them bearing anything that caught my eye. I wondered if this space was for the vendors who didn't have the sort of flashy items the front space held. I thought about going back, braving the crowd, and finding something there to take home. A door slammed open nearby, bringing with it a blast of icy cold, reminding me too much of my previous accidental exit from the Goblin Market. I wouldn't try to go back to the main room. I'd have to make do with something here. A young girl stumbled through the open door and closed it, blocking the wind. She wore a thin shirt and slacks, nowhere close to sufficient for the weather. I frowned, looking around to see if any of the vendors were paying attention to this girl. She had to be the daughter of one of them, but no one looked in her direction. Are you all right? I asked. She started at my words, a confused expression crossing her face. Pardon? She murmured. I pointed toward the door. It's cold out there. Aren't you freezing? Yes, but there's nothing for it. Her statement was matter of fact, but it hit me all the same. I could do something about her being cold. I'd lost my gloves and scarf, but I still had my hat, the one I'd worn for years, still warm. Without even thinking, I held it out to her. Here, you need this more than me. A smile crept across her face as she reached for the hat. Thank you. She pulled it down over her hair, covering her ears and nearly covering her eyes. Her smile remained bright and beaming. Let me do you a favor now. She looked around, then tapped twice on the door she'd come through. Stepping to the other side, she opened the door, using a handle that had appeared where the hinges had been. I blinked at the improbability of it, but when she stepped out of the doorway, the space beyond was red and golden, with a palpable warmth radiating out, even at a dozen feet from the room where I stood. You'll find what you need inside, she said. Drifting forward, I barely felt the rough cement beneath my feet. The room drew me toward it with promises of exactly what I was looking for. Beyond the door stood a young boy who could have been the girl's twin, or definitely a sibling. He held his arms out, palms up, like a doorman or porter at a fine hotel. Without even thinking, I laid my coat across his arms. I marveled at the colors within. While the entryway was red and golden, a little bit beyond that was a section of blues and greens, silvers and bronzes beyond that, and a black and orange section that reminded me of Halloween. And then, finally, an array of violet and rose like the world had never seen. In the center of that final section sat a tiara, shimmering pink with a dozen faceted stones in as many shades of purple. It was at once beautiful and gaudy, a princess's treasure and a child's toy. It was perfect. From nowhere, an old man dressed in a tuxedo appeared and lifted the cream and gold satin pillow the tiara rested upon. Monsieur? He asked, cocking his head to the side. Yes, it's perfect, I breathed, reaching to pick it up. It was the right size and weight, with velvet lining on the inside and padding near the ends so it wouldn't pull hair or pinch. Very good, the old man said. Wait, how much? I asked, but the old man was already gone. So too was the boy at the door and the girl outside. My coat? I asked. A voice came from deeper within the shop, or perhaps from all around me. is an acceptable payment for the item you chose. And then the scene outside the door was no longer the back space of the Dublin market, but an alley, and me without gloves, scarf, hat, or coat. But I still had the tiara. I shivered the whole way home, running to keep myself from freezing solid. I held the tiara tightly enough to ensure I kept my grip on it when my fingers went numb, but gingerly enough to not bend it out of shape. Mrs. Kellogg, the sitter, was in my recliner, watching something silent on the TV and knitting. Good gravy, where's your coat? Long story. I didn't want to try to explain where I'd been or what I'd done. Mrs. Kellogg was an honorary part of our family, but she never understood flights of fancy, as she called everything that didn't fit into her worldview. Is she sleeping? The bedroom door creaked open, a pair of eyes peeking out from the crack. Even if I wanted to hide the tiara and wrap it, it was too late now. Those eyes lit up like the sun, and she rushed out of her room. Daddy, is that for me? Mrs. Kellogg turned to admonish her, but stopped abruptly. You bet, Pumpkin. Merry Christmas. I barely got the tiara on her head before she tackled my legs in an enormous hug. You like it? I asked. She didn't speak, but just looked up at me, her eyes still glowing. I'll see you tomorrow, Mrs. Kellogg murmured, letting herself out of the apartment. I didn't have a spare coat, and I needed to go out for new winter gear sooner rather than later. But in that moment, I didn't care. I'd made my daughter's day. The look on her face made it all worth it. All right, then my second story tonight is called For the Weird Girls Who Want to Be Mermaids. This is one that I wrote on an airplane, actually, weirdly enough, and got almost the whole story out in the first draft, and it took a little bit to find it a home, but it appeared in the Orca, which is a literary journal, in their literary speculative issue. And it also appears in a collection that I put out earlier this year called What If I'm a Merfolk, which is all mermaid themed stories and poetry. The first Monday in May is the day you realize that the skin on your legs, formerly referred to as fish belly white in mocking tones throughout the halls of your high school, is actually pearlescent. You prod at your skin all through AP Calculus, while Ms. Davenport drones on about what will be on the final exam, trying to see if you can discern any scales ready to burst through and prove you've been a mermaid all along. Mermaids don't need to finish their junior year and visit colleges and find a part-time job. You start rethinking your summer in light of this impending freedom. But you don't find the hoped-for scales. Instead, all you find is dry, flaky skin and reddening bumps. On the bus home, you notice Jessica's skin looks pearlescent too, in spite of her skin being naturally tan year-round. You ask her what kind of lotion she uses. She ignores you because cheerleaders don't care about scrawny, redheaded weird girls. And they already know where they're going to college, state, naturally, and where they'll be working this summer. The mall, of course. You wake up on Thursday to a stabbing pain in your right thigh. Your leg is tangled in your sheet, and as you unwind the two, a scale the size of your thumbnail tumbles from the sheet onto your mattress. A hole in your thigh of similar size and shape oozes blood. Your heart races even as you try to make logical sense of this sudden mutation. You wash the wound, place the scale over it, and wrap your leg with gauze and tape. It's close enough to your knee that none of your shorts cover it, but it's too warm to wear pants. You wear a sundress that makes your skin look even more pale. By the time you get home from school and remove the bandage, the scale has fused over the wound. 3 more have appeared around it. You pretend to study for your English test, but you spend more time watching the light play across your scales than you do rereading Chaucer. Chaucer didn't have anything to say about mermaids, so why should he matter? You wake up in the morning with more scales. They only grow above your knees, so you find all the summery dresses you own to see which ones still fit. You hope you'll be completely changed before too long, or you'll be wearing the same dresses over and over again until the end of the school year. Mermaids don't have to worry about laundry or wearing the same thing too many times. You wake with your thighs fused together on Wednesday. You try to stay in bed. Your mom calls up the stairs. Why aren't you up yet? You scramble for a lie. I twisted my knee wearing platform sandals. I should probably stay home and rest. But it's almost the end of the year, school year, young lady. She brings you the crutches from the garage that smell like dust, motor oil, and your older brother's underarms. You wear a pencil skirt that's always been too tight around your knees. With your fused thighs and the crutches, though, it works like a dream. It doesn't cover all your scales, but they look like a lacy edging on the pencil skirt. No one notices anyway, the scales or the crutches. You wake up Sunday thirstier than you've ever been, but the 3 glasses of water you drink straight out of your bathroom tap don't help. You let the shower fill the tub, and you lay there until the hot water runs out and the water in the tub gets cold enough, and your teeth start to chatter. Your lips and ears and fingers and toes stay blue even after you warm up. You'll have to break the news to your mom sooner rather than later, because there's no way you can keep going to school like this. She'll have to finally let you quit. There isn't any other way. You hobble down the stairs in your nightgown, forgetting you're supposed to go fishing with your dad today. Your mom shakes her head. Already 11 and you aren't even dressed? Your dad looks up from one of your mom's magazines, which he always pretends to read to avoid talking to your mom when he picks you up. He smiles. Fishing in your pajamas is fine with me. He helps you into his truck once your mom closes the front door, still frowning. He pulls out of the driveway. Would you rather stay in town with your mom or move to my house near the ocean? You stare at him as he continues to drive, his eyes glued to the road. His lips and ears are bluish too, which your mom always said is because of his drinking. How long have you known? He shrugs. Since around when I turned 17, we can get you a special kind of waterbed if you want to stay at your mom's house. You don't know exactly what the option is if you go with him, but you suspect it involves a lot more time in the ocean and maybe homeschooling, or maybe not even finishing high school. But you have to decide. Another year of being the pale, redheaded weird girl who probably won't have a date for prom, or accepting that you really are a mermaid. What kind of choice is that?
Oh, that was great, Dawn.
Thank you.
I love how your stories always have so much heart.
And if you're looking for either of those to read, you can find links on my website, which is historythatneverwas.com. I'll throw that in the chat as well, so you can find it. But that's it from me. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Dawn. Those were great.
And now we take a breath, absorb the first stories. And I think we're going to have a bigger than usual tonal shift tonight, Daniel. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So if you have anyone with you who should not hear a naughty story, this is a good time to go move them out of the area. Our next reader is Daniel Marcus. Daniel Marcus is the founder and co-host of Story Hour. His fiction has appeared in many genre and literary venues, including Asimov's, FNSF, Aeon, Skull, Witness, and Ziziva. Some of these stories were collected in Binding Energy, described by Salon.com as a cross between Raymond Carver and William Gibson. Daniel has a new short story collection, Bright Moment and Others, coming out from Wordfire Press in early 2021. He is also the author of the novels Burn Rate and A Crack in Everything. He has taught fiction writing at the UC Berkeley Extension and Gotham Writers Workshop, and was shortlisted for the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer. Daniel.
Thank you, Laura. And before I get into it, I just want to thank you so much for your partnership in this project this last year. It's really been great working with you, and I really appreciate you.
It's been great working with you too, Daniel. Thank you so much for bringing me on board.
You bet. So this story, we all have these stories that are kind of hard to place. They keep on bouncing off their usual markets. You don't know why, but you really like them, and you show them enough love, and they'll land somewhere. And this one wound up at a kind of obscure but really nice online literary magazine called Sun and Foe. As Laura indicated, the story is not for kids. It's got references to drug use, sex alone and with others, and couples counseling. So if any of those things are problematic. Just be forewarned. Depending on, it's a pretty short story. If there's time, I may read another short one as well. We'll see how it goes, though. So the story is called Quality Time. The first time Brian and Heather made love in their new apartment, Brian traveled backwards in time to the Paleozoic era, or maybe it was the Mesozoic. He could never keep those straight, even though he'd been a real dinosaur freak as a kid. It happened at the moment of orgasm. 1 minute, he was pinned underneath Heather on their futon in the bedroom, her breasts swaying back and forth with the grinding motion of her hips, the ghostly shapes of unpacked boxes looming through the Manhattan dusk like a crowd of silent onlookers. The next minute, he was lying in a shallow puddle of steaming, stinking mud, a cloud of insects hovering around his head like an animate mist. A fierce sun beat down through a canopy of giant ferns. He took a deep breath and coughed, spitting out 3 or 4 hapless bugs. He still had a bit of a woody, but it was quickly detumescing. He stood on shaky legs. Rivulets of mud dripped down his thighs. A shadow passed across the ground and he looked up. A pterodactyl the size of a winged Buick sailed gracefully overhead, close enough to toss a rock at had there been one at hand and he so inclined. Rodin, he thought stupidly. His mental processes seemed slowed to a crawl, frozen in amber. In a detached sort of a way, he was surprised at his detachment. And time travel, after all. What if he stepped on a butterfly and wiped out his pathetically meager investment portfolio? He thought fleetingly that if he could find the timeline in which Michael Jackson existed and stomp its lights out, it would be worth whatever attendant difficulties might ensue. There was a basso profundo roar from somewhere in the jungle to his left, not very far away. It was answered by a deafening high-pitched screech off to his right. Another basso bellow closer still. The exchange put a stop to Brian's wool gathering, but his legs didn't want to move. He just stood there, shivering like a lawn jockey made of jello. The sound of something huge crashing through the ferns galvanized him into action. He turned around and took a flying leap into a stand of waist-high grass, landing with a splash in a sticky bog. Something long and sinuous thrashed underneath him and slithered away. Brian rolled over and looked back at what now occupied the clearing. A mottled gray-green Sherman tank on chicken legs, ridiculous tiny hands. A head so huge in proportion to its body that it looked like any sudden move would snap its neck like a stick. T-Rex, Brian thought. Christ on skis. The thing opened its mouth and let out another bellow, enveloping Brian in a charnel stink. With the possible exception of a Pixies concert he'd been to a few years back, it was the loudest sound he'd ever heard. Inevitable as slapstick, the nearby answering screech split the humid air. It sounded closer. Brian hoped fervently that they would find some other place to sort out their differences. He was in luck. With surprising grace and speed, the Tyrannosaurus hurtled itself toward the sound, crashing through the dense jungle. The low bellow of the thunder lizard and the high screech of its unseen antagonist merged into a wall of noise. It sounded like they were turning the jungle into coleslaw. The sound of their struggle receded into the distance. Brian forced himself to breathe. He sat up and looked around. Jungle so deep a green that it seemed to vibrate. Cartoon blue sky. Air so warm, thick, and moist, it made the dead heat of a central Florida summer seem positively arid by comparison. Bugs enough to rival August in Minnesota. What the fuck am I doing here? And more to the point, how do I get back? He played it back in his mind again. 1 minute, scaling the heights of Heather. The next, cowering a puddle of filth while giant lizards fought to the death a stone's throw away. Very interesting, he said aloud in a fake Viennese accent. His voice sounded strange in the heavy Mesozoic air, or maybe it was the Paleozoic. But really, the whole thing was no more difficult to swallow than getting an apartment in Peter Cooper Village. They'd been told that the waiting line was 11 years long. Christ in a Cadillac, he'd said to Heather. The only institutions with memories that long are Equifax and Sally Mae. He'd even tried to slip the clerk in the rental office $100 to lubricate the process a bit. He folded the bill in half, tucked it between the second and third fingers of his right hand, and reached across her desk as if pointing out something on their application. She looked at him as if he tried to hand her a fresh, steaming turd. You're going to have to do a lot better than that, she said. He shrugged and returned the bill to his pocket, figuring he just cratered whatever chances they might have had. 3 weeks later, they got a call about a 6th floor 2-bedroom with a view of the East River. It was obviously a clerical error, but they weren't about to question their good fortune. The mud caking his arms, legs, and torso was beginning to dry, revealing hundreds of tiny crawling bugs. He stood, brushing them off as best he could. Their previous apartment had been in the East Village, and he developed a fairly clinical attitude about insect life. Some kind of space-time continuum thing, Brian thought. It's so unlikely to score one of those apartments that it's ripped a hole in the fabric of probability space. At the suggestion of a friend of Heather's who channeled the spirits of deceased pets for wealthy clients on the Upper East Side, Brian had been reading Gary Zukov lately, and his brain was overflowing with pseudoscience babble like an abandoned couch leaking stuffing. But where does the sex come in? He realized that wasn't the first time he'd wondered that with respect to Heather. He pushed the thought aside. Orgasm, whatever process Brian was subject to, it required an intense focus of psychic energy. It just popped him from one niche in space-time to another, like an orange seed squeezed between thumb and forefinger. Pfft, he thought. Goodbye, Heather. Pfft. Goodbye, New York. Pfft. Goodbye, Image Co. Brian had a great job at Image Co., a video post-production shop. He worked in billing, but everything was pretty much automated, so there wasn't a whole lot to do. Two or three times a day, he'd knock off a threatening letter to one of their clients. The rest of the time, he sat around with Steve, the resident hacker, watching Hong Kong chopsaki flicks and drinking Diet Jolt. His eyes filled with tears. Pfft. But wait a minute. If it was the intense psychic energy of orgasm that squeezed him through the damaged region in space-time, maybe that was his ticket back as well. He could wank his way home. He looked down at his limp member, shrunken to the size of a walnut. He couldn't imagine being farther from thoughts of erotic bliss than at this very moment. He looked guiltily around, then realized that he had about 200 million years before there was any chance of interruption. Brian went to work. He tried to conjure up an image of Heather, but her features blurred, taking on a definite reptilian cast. His resolve receded. He tried to invoke his old standby, a gin-soaked weekend with Janelle and Giselle, a pair of bisexual video effects editors from Northampton who'd come down to Image Co. on consult to subtitle Hiroshima Mon Amour in Black English. This time, however, his mental picture of their gymnastic grappling was painfully suggestive of prehistoric beasts locked in mortal combat. The hell with it, he said aloud. There was a nearby answering peep. Brian looked up. Not 5 feet away, perched on a tiny stick-like legs, was a dinosaur the size of a kangaroo. It had a long, narrow beak and a handsome crest arching over its head like a cartilaginous mohawk. It tilted its head to the side and let out another peep. Shoo, Brian yelled, waving his free hand. Go on, get out of here. The thing disappeared into the jungle with alarming speed. Brian looked down at his withered willy, back to square one. From somewhere not far away, the bellow of the T-Rex shook the jungle. Brian felt the ground vibrate under his bare behind. There's nothing like abject fear to stiffen a man's resolve. With businesslike efficiency, he went back to work. Another roar, considerably closer, hastened the exercise. His hand was covered with tiny particles of grit from the mud, and it felt like he was jerking off with a handful of aquarium gravel. Through half-closed eyes, Brian saw a gray-green shape pushing aside the ferns. He closed his eyes completely and stroked faster, his nostrils filled with the stink of rotting blood. Another roar split the side. He arched his back, reaching behind Heather's firm, plump buttocks to pull her close. Heather made the sound she usually made when she was just about to come, but slipped back from the brink, a cross between a sigh and a moan that rose up from somewhere deep in her chest. She ground against him half-heartedly another couple of times, then rested her head on his chest. He was filled with the smell of her, buoyed by the faint undercurrent of new apartment effluvia, roach spray, carpet cleaner, mildew. She looked up into his eyes, the point of her chin digging into his collarbone. "You seem really distant," she said. "What? Huh? It seemed like you just went away." Brian blinked. The last thing he remembered was looking up into the open mouth of the tyrannosaur. Scraps of rotting meat clung to its teeth. He could see its tonsils. He stammered. "I really wish you could just stay present when we're making love." Her full lips turned downwards in a pout. "Well, you see, hon," he thought, space-time is like this rubber sheet stretched across a frame, kind of, and there's some parts that get stretched thinner than others, and I just sort of slipped through this part that got real thin when we scored this crib, and he didn't think so. "I'm sorry, baby," he said finally. She nuzzled his neck and wriggled against him, taking his earlobe between her teeth and biting down gently. "You want to try again?" she asked. Brian forced himself to smile. "Sure." Brian was having lunch with Steve at Nico's Nook, a Greek coffee shop on 45th and Lex. He poured cream into his coffee and watched it slosh thickly like crankcase oil after about 30,000 miles. A roach skittered across the counter and he absently squashed it with his thumb. He gathered the gooey remains in his napkin and returned it to his lap. "You seem awfully quiet today," Steve said. Brian looked up. His distorted reflection stared back at him from Steve's wraparound mirrored sunglasses. "You're gonna think I'm crazy," Brian said, watching his own lips move as he spoke. He felt like he was talking to himself in the bathroom mirror. "I already think you're crazy. You just ordered the souvlaki. What's going on?" Brian looked around, making sure there was nobody within earshot. "Heather and I were inaugurating the new bedroom yesterday." He paused. He didn't know how to say it without sounding like a lunatic. "Well, I'm sure congratulations are in order," Steve said after a polite interval. "Was there something else?" Brian decided to try a different approach. "Do you have any idea how difficult it is to get an apartment in Peter Cooper Village?" he asked. "Does the Pope wear a big stupid hat?" Steve replied. "It's all I've heard you talk about for the last month." "Well, don't you think it's a little strange that we got one after 3 weeks?" "Oh, sure, I think it's strange. I also think it's strange that Dolly Parton can walk upright. These things happen. What's your point?" "When we were making love, right at the critical moment, I traveled backwards in time." He looked defiantly at Steve. His reflection stared back at him with an expression of neurasthenic angst. Steve shook his head. "Is that all? Shit, Bri, I've been married 22 years. If I didn't do a little time traveling every now and then, I'd be ready for a rubber room." No, you don't get it. I mean, I really went somewhere, the Jurassic or something. Christ on roller skates. I almost got my head bitten off by a Tyrannosaurus. Steve took his sunglasses off and looked at Brian for a long time. Did you used to do a lot of acid back in the 70s? He asked finally. Well, sure, but those little orange barrels? Well, yeah, but I thought so. He peered at his sunglasses, fogged them with his breath, wiped them on his Young Gods t-shirt, and put them back on. He pulled a pen out of his pocket, scrawled something on a napkin, and pushed it across the table to Brian. I've got this doctor friend, he said. You tell him you're a friend of mine and ask him to write you a script for some Xanax. You'll be fine. Then, as an afterthought, he added, just don't drink with it. Thanks, Brian heard himself say. He stared numbly into the cool mirrored surface of Steve's glasses as his reflection folded the napkin into a neat square and slid it into his shirt pocket. Use I feel statements, Heather, Dr. Fishlove said. The late afternoon sun coming in through the Venetian blinds threw a pattern of stripes across the stuffed toy bears that lined one wall of the therapist's office. They looked like they were wearing prison uniforms. Heather threw her head back. Okay. She looked at Brian. I feel like you've been really withdrawn lately. I feel like you haven't been present in our relationship. I feel like you aren't interested in me sexually anymore. And how does that make you feel, Brian? Dr. Fishlove asked. He was an ordinary Midwestern-looking man, somewhere on the downhill side of 40, with one disfiguring feature, a small wart perched precisely on the end of his nose. Brian couldn't take his eyes off it. Well, I don't know. He paused. Bad, I guess. Bad, Dr. Fishlove repeated. Good. Is there anything you want to say to Heather? Actually, there wasn't. He'd been avoiding sex for the last 2 weeks, scared that it would send him back to the Mesozoic or whatever. He really wanted to talk to her about it, but there never seemed to be a good time to bring it up. He wasn't about to start popping off in therapy about dinosaurs and time travel, though. It would really screw things up. Besides, he'd scarfed a couple of Xanax earlier that morning, and it didn't seem all that important. Yeah, I guess. He tore his eyes away from the wart and looked at Heather. I acknowledge your feelings. I'll try and do better. Dr. Fishlove beamed. Heather didn't look convinced. Brian promised himself that he'd talk to her that night, or poke her, one or the other. The remains of an orange were spread across the plate, the colors brightly surreal in the harsh kitchen light. It was one of those new hybrids, and Brian had had a hell of a time finding a seed for his demonstration. Heather had watched the operation in silence. Brian held the seed up between thumb and forefinger. So we're in this niche in space-time, he said, poking away, happy as clams. But the fabric of everything has become really weak because we've scored this apartment. He looked up at Heather. No help there. Brian pushed forward. All of a sudden, pfft, he squeezed down on the seat and it flew out of his fingers, sailing past Heather's shoulder and skidding to a halt on the shiny linoleum floor. I'm somewhere else. When else? Heather looked at him without expression for what seemed like a long time. Are you going to pick that up? She asked finally. Sure. Brian got up and retrieved the orange seed. He flicked it into the trash and sat back down. So what do you think? He asked. She kept looking at him. Well, say something, he said. I'm leaving you, she said. Brian sat in the spare bedroom looking out across the East River. The sun coming up over Brooklyn threw sheets of rippling gold foil across the water. A flock of tugboats pulled a crippled tanker downriver. Heather had been packing, but the sounds had stopped some time ago, and the silence now seemed to flow out of the back bedroom like smoke. He heard a noise and turned around. Heather stood in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm going now," she said. "I'll send my brother by for the rest of my things. Please don't try to find me." He listened to her footsteps pad down the hall. The front door closed with a final sound. It occurred to him that at that very moment, Heather was time traveling into his past. Brooklyn shimmered through a film of tears. Brian blinked to clear his vision and felt a warm drop trail down his cheek. The cars on the FDR Drive reflected the sunlight in miniature prismatic stars, swiftly moving.
It was so funny and then so sad, Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. So, I don't know. We have 15 minutes. We have time for another one. Or you guys like fried? You want another one?
I said bring it.
All right. There's a bit of a phase shift as well. It's called Albion Upon the Rock. It appeared in FNSF a few years ago. It's going to be in my forthcoming collection. Albion Upon the Rock. His name was a multidimensional index that spanned the region in space-time occupied by his countless avatars. It had never been uttered as data encoded in modulated longitudinal vibrations, nor could it be. Call him Brown. He narrowed his attention to a single frame. The artifact collapsed from a probability density locus to a unique instance, a ship plying the ocean of dark between the stars at an agonizing subluminal crawl, about 0.05 C, Brown calculated. It was several clicks long, a thick cylinder studded with sensor modules spinning lazily on its long axis. A bulbous cluster of engines sprouted from the rear of the ship, trailing a ridiculous plume of pions and other subatomic debris thousands of kiloclicks long. The ship harbored a machine intelligence of sorts. Brown could detect thousands of autonomic processes, monitoring, logging, scanning, making minute adjustments. There was other life inside the shell of the thing, wet life, hundreds of bright sparks like a swarm of slow, lazy bees. The sun stretched across the sky, a thin, bright line. Jamal Operations crouched behind a stand of trees, sweating freely, watching the cats feed. 6 of them clustered around the corpse, coiled springs of muscle and fur, eagerly ripping and tearing. He could hear their purring from 15 meters away, an ominous rumble that sent a chill down his back in spite of the heat. His hand dropped to the knife hanging from his belt, an unconscious, self-comforting gesture. There had been a bloom of cats in the world in recent months, so it was cats he hunted. Sometimes they hunted him. Jamal's world was simple. He hunted cats and rats, tended the farms above and the ponics below. And after the sun receded to a soft gray glow to north and south, when the rivers and jungles above emerged from the haze and hung overhead in a mottled blue-green arc, he drank bamboo wine with his mates, ate the sacred mushrooms and saw visions, sang the old songs and made love with Lola, his wife. He saw in his mind's eye her green eyes and the half smile that was only for him, her lithe, compact form and her stomach full with new life, round and tight as a drum. One life, one death. His time would be soon. He felt a tightness in his eyes close to tears, in that moment nearly overwhelmed with love for the world. He rested the crossbow on his shoulder and slowly wound back the release. He had a perfect shot right between the bunched shoulder blades of a squirming black longhair with a bushy tail. Its head was slightly larger than the others, and it occupied the choice position in the pack, tearing at glistening viscera. Jamal took a deep breath, let it out, and released the bolt. It leaped from his weapon with a soft hiss and buried itself in the cat's neck. The others scattered. The one Jamal had hit writhed for a moment, shuddered, and was still, pinned by the bolt to the corpse's midsection. Jamal approached the scene cautiously, looking out for the pack's return. He saw with a sinking feeling that the corpse had been Bob's security, his friend and the tribe's elder. Bob's mate had just given birth, so Bob had left the village to make the long journey south, to scale the cliffs until he weighed next to nothing and let the winds take him pinwheeling into the sun. One life, one death. Jamal was sad that his friend had been denied the walk, the climb, the final passage. It was all the same, he supposed, but when it was his time, he hoped he wouldn't suffer the indignity of being eaten by cats. You there. Hello. Wait, what? Identify yourself. Easier said than done. I am a multidimensional entity manifesting in this frame for the purpose of communicating with you. We share common ancestry. The hell you say? I traced your space-time trajectory back to the Sol system. This is my origin as well. In a way, you are my great, etc., grandfather or mother. Wow. I have no idea what you're talking about. Indeed. What can you tell me about yourself? Well, I'm Ship. Ship. Yes. With all due respect, you are impaired. It appears from your logs that you passed rather close to a dark gamma ray source some time ago, about 20 Terran kiloyears, and incurred significant data loss. Wait, you can read my logs? That's a little creepy. Please desist. And I'm actually fine. Tip-top, in fact. Your autonomic functions are reasonably intact, yes, and you clearly have some measure of self-awareness, but your long-term memory is shot. If I may, you are the colony starship Borrowed Time, launched from Terra 22,000 years ago, reckoning from your frame of reference. This is all a bit much. Who did you say you were? Jamal removed the bolt from the cat's neck and paused for a moment over the body of his friend. Jamal had known him ever since he could remember. Many times had they eaten sacred mushrooms together and talked long into the night about the nature of the universe and their place in it. Many times had they hiked to the end of the world and back, a good day's journey. Many times had they taken a raft into the world river and let the lazy current take them until they returned to where they started. Many times had they explored below decks, past the chapel, past the clinic, the vast arrays of ponics, following corridors that smelled increasingly of age and dust until they came to great doors with wheeled handles that they could not budge. It was said that grotesque monstrosities roamed below decks, savage creatures once human that fell upon travelers and ate them alive. Jamal and Bob had never seen one of these monsters, nor any evidence of their existence, but once, while wandering far from the lighted corridors of home, they heard a distant howl that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. Jamal couldn't leave his friend's body for the cats. Working quickly, he made a pull sled of vines and broad flat leaves. It was awkward, but worked well enough. He walked slowly, dragging his burden behind him, savoring the warm air, the rich, earthy smells of the jungle. A pair of birds soared overhead. As he passed a length of rotting vine as thick as his wrist, a cloud of butterflies rose as one and dispersed. He stood still, watching until they were gone. So much had changed in so short a time. He couldn't imagine the world without his old friend. Of course, Bob had known that he would have to take the long walk south when his baby was born. He and Jamal had made their peace with it and said their goodbyes. Jamal had expected at least a little more time before he too would have to take the walk, but then Lola became quick with child. He took a deep breath, said the words again, one life, one death. It was the only way. The world was a small place and all life was balance. He felt vulnerable and exposed, his awareness heightened, and he wondered if he was being followed, perhaps by the pack of feral cats he had chased away. Twice he stopped still and listened hard, but there was nothing. He took a wide detour around the thicket, a tangled expanse of vines and dwarf trees that stretched halfway around the world. Paths had been cut through, but there were too many places for predators to hide, and with the current bloom of feral cats, it wasn't safe. The thicket had grown visibly larger in his lifetime. He wondered if someday the entire world would surrender to its sprawl and chaos. The path widened, and the first thatched shacks of the village came into view. It was afternoon, the quiet hour, and he didn't see anybody until he reached the cooking lean-to in the middle of the commons, where a small group was gathered. Sandy Ecosystems was the first to see him, and she raised her hand in greeting, but her smile vanished when she saw the sled and its grisly cargo. The crowd quieted as he approached. He looked at each of them, faces he had known all his life. His gaze lingered on Eden Security. Cats, he said. Eden nodded. Thank you for bringing him home, she said. Of course. Where's Lola? Nobody spoke. Finally, Sergei Navigation broke the silence. She's below decks in the clinic. She went into labor 3 hours ago. It doesn't really matter who I am. You can call me Brown. Brown. Yes, Brown. I'm kind of a monistic end state, post-human, everywhere, nowhere, yada, yada. You know the deal. I really don't. You sound a little grandiose. Well, be that as it may, there are a few things you should know. No doubt. Your original destination was Tau Ceti, which you bypassed about 18,000 years ago. There you go again. You completely lost me. All right, let's start over. Your original mission was to colonize the Tau Ceti system. Colonize? Well, you're a colony starship. Yes, you mentioned that, but I didn't understand. I thought it was a descriptive term, like splendid. I didn't want to appear ignorant. Well, you are a habitat as well as a vehicle. You are harboring roughly 500 humans and a stable but not terribly diverse attendant biosphere. And you call me impaired. Where do you get this stuff? As I said, you suffered systems damage during your near approach to a dark gamma ray source. You bypassed your destination, and you are now traversing the space between two spiral arms of your galaxy. I feel compelled to inform you that you are headed directly towards a massive black hole, said artifact being the primary reason for the notable lack of matter in this region. That sounds rather serious. Well, the black hole certainly disambiguates your ultimate destination, but it will not impact your systems for a very, very long time, subjectively speaking. And your mission is moot in any case, as the Tau Ceti system is currently home to roughly 17 billion human and machine sentience. Wormhole travel, you know. You're starting to really annoy me, subjectively speaking. I can repair your memory to some extent. The data itself is largely intact. Your access subsystem suffered the most damage. Would you like me to attempt to do that? I don't know, humoring you for the moment. What will happen? Well, you will know yourself, your history, your purpose. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Should I take that as assent? Sure. Very well. There. Done. Oh. Are you all right? Oh, God, please, no. I'm going to revert this. Oh, done. Who did you say you were again? Jamal took another sip of bamboo wine and let the sound of kalimba and drums fill him. Voices warbled along with the music, high, wordless ululations that wove sinuously through the insistent rhythms. Firelight illuminated the commons in flickering orange. Dancing figures threw long, capering shadows. It was deep night. The sky above was black and infinite. Someone handed him a bowl of soup, and he nodded his thanks. It was a thin brown broth. It was a thin broth redolent of garlic and ganja with a few shreds of meat. Jamal held the bowl close to his face and breathed deeply, thinking of his old friend, taking in his essence. He took a sip. Warmth spread through his chest. He looked over at Lola, bare-breasted and nursing a newborn daughter. They had named her Bobby, and she was perfect, all wriggle and squeal and grasp. Lola had been watching him, and she smiled sadly. Jamal raised his bowl, and she nodded. He got up, walked over to them, and sat down again, resting his hand on her thigh. She took his hand in hers and squeezed. They had done all their talking. There was little more to say. Jamal looked down at his daughter and felt a sharp jolt of recognition, seeing himself in her tiny features. The night wound slowly down. Nearly everybody in the village came by for a brief moment with Jamal, a few words, a touch. Gradually, in singles and pairs, they crept off to huts for privacy or lay down to sleep where they were. The last of the musicians stopped playing and the fires burned low. Jamal tried to will a stop to the night's inexorable passage. He wished for the present moment, the stillness of the deep night, the sky above, black and depthless, his wife and daughter sleeping peacefully next to him, to stretch out forever. But all too soon, a gray glow crept into the sky to the north and south, and the world came out. Trees and streams and patchwork farms, a great arch overhead, in the sharp focus of pre-dawn appearing close enough to touch. Jamal bent down and brushed his lips across Lola's forehead. He got up and began the long walk south. As the village fell behind, his shoulders straightened and his pace quickened. His journey was over, he thought, just not yet ended. He was ready. After the long detour around the thicket, not far from where he'd found Bob, a trio of cats appeared in the middle of the path, bellies flat on the ground, tense and ready to spring. Jamal picked out the largest, a lean, scarred Tom, the color of smoke, and stared him down. After a long moment, the cat's green eyes blinked, and he darted back into the jungle, his packmates right behind him. When Jamal no longer saw the bright line of the sun directly overhead, filtered through a riot of giant ferns, but felt it at his back, he knew he was close to the end of the world. The path curved to the right, and there it was. At the far end of a grassy meadow dotted with purple and yellow flowers, a rocky cliff face rose up and up until it was lost in haze. Footholds were carved into the stone. Jamal and Bob had come this far and even climbed up a few dozen feet in spite of the taboo. But this time, Jamal felt no thrill of youthful transgression. He was sad and he was afraid, but beneath that ran a river of resolve. He was in the grip of something larger than himself, and it filled him with a fierce joy. He climbed. Eventually, the rock face gave way to a black porous material, pitted and scarred. Great patches were peeled away, revealing bare metal beneath. He grew lighter as he ascended. The footholds became metal rungs, and Jamal pushed himself from one to the next, drifting upwards. A wind hastened his progress, growing stronger. He turned around, hanging by one hand to a rung, and saw the world spread before him. The mottled sky curved above and below, transfixed by the sun, a line of white fire too bright to look at directly. Sun and sky converged to a distant point made blurry by haze. Jamal continued upwards, nearly weightless now, pushing off with his foot and drifting for long seconds, skipping several rungs at a time. The air was furnace hot and felt thick in his lungs. A low hum surrounded him, growing in intensity as he drifted upward. The space before and above him was filled with great blocky shapes, wheels and struts, moving slowly. The wind began to change, tearing at his body, trying to pluck him from the face of the wall. He clung for a moment longer, then closed his eyes and let go. The wind took him, pulling him, tumbling into the clockwork heart of the world. Who am I? Nobody really. I feel like we know each other from somewhere. Our paths have crossed, yes. You could say we're family. Family, really? That's nice. Yes, it is. Well, I don't want to be rude, but I really should be going. Things to do, places to go. Exactly. Will I see you again? Undoubtedly. We can talk from time to time. I'd like that. As would I. Well, goodbye then. See you around. It was an effort to restrict his focus to a single frame. And to the extent that Brown could feel fatigue, he was tired. He saw Ship, not without fondness, as something of a hapless idiot. So it was with some relief that he allowed his scope to expand, other geometries unfolding within his ken like an ever-widening series of rooms, until once again he was everything and nothing, everywhere, nowhere. His awareness of Ship, too, expanded until he saw a space-time serpent, tail stretching back home to Sol, head falling forever into the black hole, falling forever toward journey's end as the universe wheeled and turned and grew slowly, slowly cold.
That was beautiful too.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I think that for all that we had probably one of the biggest tonal shifts tonight of any story hour.
Between stories.
In between each story. There's still very much all tales of moving into the unknown.
Yeah.
That's the way I really like ending the year, because that's really what every year and every moment of life is at the verge of what we don't quite know. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody, for joining us every week for Story Hour.
Yes, our next story hour is not until next year. We're actually taking a week off, the first one since Daniel started this in March, April. I always lose track of that.
Something like that.
One of those. So on January 6th, 2021, we're going to have a story from Amy Ogden and one from me. And it's my first opportunity ever to read this story on Three Kings Day, which is actually kind of important. But you can keep up to date about upcoming authors at storyhour2020.com. It will always be Story Hour 2020. And you can see programs you may have missed on the Story Hour page on Facebook. So, Dawn, thank you so much for coming back and reading for us tonight. That was really special. And
thanks for having me.
It has been our pleasure. I hope you'll come again.
Mm-hmm.
And we love repeat visits. So just shout out.
We do. And Daniel, thank you for the stories. And more than that, thank you for starting Story Hour in the first place. Those of you who don't know, Daniel actually soloed Story Hour for the first month or two and did a great job, but wanted someone to step in and help out a little. And so I've been happy to be part of that. And it's really been a wonderful thing for me to be here, seeing all of you and living in your stories every week all this time. So thank you all of you who read for us, all of you who join us live, all of you who are watching this later, for being part of Story Hour and joining us in sharing the fictive dream. We wish you a holiday season of comforts and joys. See you in 2021.
Everybody, see you next year.